When my fiancé told me that hearing about my pregnancy was gross and ruining his appetite, I decided to give him exactly what he wanted: complete silence about everything baby-related. What he didn't expect was that this silence would include the moment I went into premature labor at 34 weeks while he was out partying with his friends. I'm Emma, and this is the story of how my fiancé David's disgust with my pregnancy turned what should have been the happiest time of our lives into a nightmare that ended with me delivering our daughter alone in a hospital room while he was getting drunk at his buddy's bachelor party. It all started innocently enough. David and I had been together for 5 years, engaged for 8 months, and we were both excited when we found out I was pregnant. We immediately started planning the nursery, talking about baby names, and dreaming about our future as a family. But somewhere around week 12, when the morning sickness hit hard, and my body started changing in ways I couldn't control, David's enthusiasm began to fade. At first, it was just little comments. When I'd mention feeling nauseous, he'd wrinkle his nose and say, "TMI, babe." When I tried to share the excitement of feeling our baby's first kicks, he'd change the subject. But I thought it was just nerves. After all, this was new territory for both of us. I had no idea that his discomfort would escalate into something so cruel that it would destroy our relationship and leave me questioning everything I thought I knew about the man I was supposed to marry. What happened next showed me exactly who David really was when I needed him most. Let me paint you a picture of who we were before everything fell apart. I'm Emma, 26 years old, working as a graphic designer for a marketing agency in Portland. I've always been the type of person who gets excited about details, whether it's a new design project or planning the perfect birthday party. I'm a sharer by nature. When something happens in my life, good or bad, I want to talk about it with the people I love. David is 29, works in tech sales, and has always been what you'd call a guy's guy. He loves sports, craft beer, and hanging out with his college buddies every weekend. When we first started dating 5 years ago, I found his laid-back attitude refreshing. While I was always overthinking everything, David kept things simple and fun. He was the one who convinced me to try rock climbing, introduced me to hiking, and taught me how to appreciate a good IPA. Our relationship had always worked because we balanced each other out. I brought organization and emotional depth to his life, while he helped me relax and not take everything so seriously. We rarely fought, and when we did, it was usually about small stuff like whose turn it was to do dishes, or whether we should spend Christmas with his family or mine. The proposal happened last Christmas at his parents' cabin in the mountains. It was perfect. Just the two of us by the fireplace, snow falling outside, and David getting down on one knee with his grandmother's ring. I cried happy tears, called my mom immediately, and started planning our October wedding the next day. David seemed just as excited, helping me look at venues and even having opinions about flowers, which surprised me. When we decided to start trying for a baby in February, it felt like the natural next step. We'd been living together for 3 years in our cozy 2-bedroom apartment, and we'd always talked about wanting kids someday. David was great with his nephew, and always said he wanted to be a young dad so he could keep up with his kids. We even picked out the 2nd bedroom as the future nursery and started talking about converting it. I got pregnant faster than we expected, literally the first month we tried. When I saw those 2 pink lines on the test, I was so excited I could barely contain myself. I planned this elaborate surprise for David, wrapping the pregnancy test in a little gift box and giving it to him when he got home from work. His face lit up when he realized what it meant, and he spun me around the kitchen while we both laughed and cried. Those first few weeks were magical. David downloaded pregnancy apps on his phone and would tell me random facts about how big the baby was each week. "Today, our baby is the size of a blueberry," he'd announce over breakfast. We spent hours on Pinterest looking at nursery ideas, and David even started a spreadsheet tracking all the baby gear we'd need to buy. He came with me to my first doctor's appointment at 8 weeks, holding my hand while we listened to the heartbeat for the first time. I'll never forget the look of wonder on his face when that tiny sound filled the room. He squeezed my hand so tight and whispered, "That's our baby." We both cried, and I felt so grateful to have a partner who was as excited about this journey as I was. But then week 10 hit, and with it came the morning sickness from hell. I'm talking about the kind where you can't keep anything down, where the smell of coffee makes you sprint to the bathroom, where you're throwing up so hard you burst blood vessels in your eyes. David had seen me sick before with the flu or food poisoning, but this was different. This was daily, unpredictable, and intense. The first time I threw up in front of him during this pregnancy, I noticed him flinch and look away. When I tried to explain how awful I felt, hoping for some sympathy, he just nodded and said, "Yeah, that sucks," before changing the subject to something about work. I brushed it off, thinking he was just uncomfortable because he'd never been around someone with morning sickness before. David's family had always been pretty traditional. His mom, Carol, was the type who never complained about anything and always put on a brave face. She'd had 3 kids, and according to family stories, never once mentioned feeling sick or uncomfortable during any of her pregnancies. David's dad, Mike, was old-school masculine, the kind of guy who thought emotions were for women and that men should just tough it out, no matter what. Looking back, I think David grew up believing that pregnancy was something women just handled quietly in the background, while life continued as normal for everyone else. He'd never been exposed to the reality of what pregnancy actually involves, the physical symptoms, the emotional changes, the way it affects every aspect of your daily life. Our friend group was mostly other young professionals who were focused on careers and travel. None of them had kids yet, so David didn't have any examples of supportive partners going through pregnancy together. His closest friends were still in the bachelor lifestyle mindset, and I started noticing how they'd make jokes about ball and chain situations, or complain about their girlfriends being too emotional. I thought David was different, though. In 5 years together, he'd always been supportive when I was stressed about work, or dealing with family drama. He'd bring me tea when I had cramps, rub my shoulders after long days, and listen patiently when I needed to vent. I assumed pregnancy would be the same, that he'd step up and be my rock during this challenging but exciting time. I had no idea that his discomfort with the physical realities of pregnancy would turn into something much darker. The changes in David's behavior started so subtly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. It began around week 12, when my morning sickness was at its peak, and my body was starting to show the first real signs of pregnancy. The first red flag came during what should have been a romantic dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant. I'd been looking forward to it all week. We hadn't been out together in ages because I'd been feeling so awful. But halfway through my pasta, a wave of nausea hit me like a truck. I excused myself and barely made it to the bathroom before throwing up everything I'd eaten. When I came back to the table, pale and shaky, David was scrolling through his phone with an annoyed expression. "You okay?" he asked without looking up. I tried to explain how sudden and intense the nausea had been, hoping for some comfort, but he just sighed and said, "Maybe we should just get the check. This is kind of killing the mood." I felt hurt, but I told myself he was just disappointed about our ruined date night. Surely he'd be more understanding once he got used to this new reality. But the pattern continued. When I'd wake up in the morning and immediately run to the bathroom, David would groan and put a pillow over his head. "Can you try to be quieter?" he'd mumble. "Some of us have important meetings today." When I tried to explain that I couldn't control when or how loudly I threw up, he'd just roll his eyes and say I was being dramatic. The worst part was how he started treating my pregnancy symptoms like personal inconveniences to him. When I had to cancel plans because I was too nauseous to leave the house, he'd act like I was doing it on purpose to ruin his fun. When I asked him to pick up ginger ale and crackers on his way home because I couldn't keep anything else down, he'd sigh heavily and mutter about how high maintenance I was becoming. Around week 14, my breasts started getting noticeably larger and more tender. I was excited about this change. It felt like real proof that my body was doing what it was supposed to do. I tried to share this excitement with David one evening, mentioning how crazy it was that my bras were already getting too small. His response stopped me cold. "Do you have to give me a play-by-play of every weird thing happening to your body? It's kind of gross, Em." I stared at him shocked. "Gross? David, this is your baby causing these changes. I thought you'd want to know what I'm going through." He shrugged and turned back to his laptop. "I mean, I get that stuff is happening, but I don't need all the details. Can't you just handle it quietly?" That night, I lay awake wondering when my fiancé had become someone who found my pregnancy gross. This was supposed to be something we were experiencing together, but he was making me feel like I was going through it alone. The isolation got worse when David started making excuses to avoid my doctor's appointments. After coming to the first one, he suddenly had important client calls, or can't-miss meetings, every time I had a checkup scheduled. When I pointed out that he'd managed to find time for his buddy Jake's fantasy football draft, he got defensive. "That's different, Em. The doctor's appointments are just routine stuff. You can handle those on your own, right? You're a strong, independent woman. He said it like he was being supportive, but it felt like he was just trying to get out of being involved. His friends started making comments too. During a barbecue at Jake's house when I was about 16 weeks along, I overheard David talking to his college buddies by the beer cooler. "Dude, pregnancy is so weird," he was saying. "Like, Emma tells me about all this stuff happening to her body, and it's just, I don't know, man. It's not exactly sexy, you know?" The guys laughed, and someone made a joke about how I'd probably get even more emotional as the pregnancy progressed. David didn't defend me. He just laughed along and grabbed another beer. I felt humiliated. These were supposed to be our friends, and David was basically complaining about me behind my back like I was some burden he had to deal with. The breaking point came during week 18, when I was finally starting to show a real bump. I was so excited. After months of just feeling sick and bloated, I finally looked pregnant instead of like I'd eaten too much pizza. I put on a fitted dress that showed off my bump and asked David what he thought. He barely glanced up from his phone. "It's fine." "David, look at me. I'm actually showing now. Isn't this exciting?" He looked at me then, but his expression wasn't excitement. It was something closer to discomfort, maybe even disgust. "Yeah, I can see that. It's weird, you know? You look so different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Just not like you anymore." Those words hit me like a physical blow. Not like me anymore? I was still the same person, just growing our child. But David was looking at me like I'd become some alien creature he didn't recognize. That night I called my best friend Sarah, crying. She listened to everything, and then said something that stuck with me. Pregnancy is supposed to be hard on your body, but it shouldn't be hard on your relationship. A good partner makes you feel beautiful and supported, not gross and ashamed. But tudo começou a mudar quando David started actively avoiding physical intimacy with me. He'd come to bed later and later, always with some excuse about work or being tired. When I tried to initiate any kind of affection, he'd stiffen up and find a reason to pull away. I was about to learn that his discomfort with my changing body was just the beginning of something much worse. The real escalation started around week 20, right after our anatomy scan. I had gone alone, of course, since David claimed he had a crucial presentation that day. When I came home with the ultrasound photos and the news that we were having a healthy baby girl, I expected him to at least pretend to be excited. Instead, David barely looked at the pictures. "Cool," he said, not even pausing his video game. "A girl, huh?" I sat down next to him on the couch, holding the ultrasound photos like they were precious treasures. "David, look at her. You can see her little face. And the technician said she's measuring perfectly. Don't you want to see your daughter?" He glanced at the grainy black and white image for maybe 2 seconds. "Yeah, it's nice. But honestly, it just looks like a blob to me. I'll get excited when she actually looks like a baby." I felt my heart sink. This was our daughter's first photo, and he was calling her a blob. "The technician said she's already sucking her thumb. Look, you can see it right here. Emma, stop." David finally paused his game and turned to face me, but his expression was annoyed, not loving. "I don't need a play-by-play of every little thing you saw today. Can we just acknowledge that the baby is healthy and move on?" That night, I lay in bed staring at the ultrasound photos by myself, wondering how I'd ended up feeling so alone in what was supposed to be the most exciting time of our lives. Things got exponentially worse when my second trimester symptoms kicked in. Around week 22, I started experiencing what my doctor called lightning crotch, sharp shooting pains that would hit without warning as the baby pressed on nerves. The first time it happened in front of David, I gasped and grabbed my belly, doubling over from the sudden pain. "Jesus Christ, Emma, what the hell was that?" David jumped back like I was contagious. "It's just a pregnancy thing," I explained, still catching my breath. "The baby is pressing on a nerve. It's totally normal, but it really hurts when it happens." David's face contorted in disgust. That's not normal. Normal people don't just randomly scream in pain." "David, I'm growing a human being. My body is doing incredible things, but that doesn't mean it's always comfortable. This is what pregnancy looks like. Well, it's fucking weird, And honestly, it's kind of scary. What if something's actually wrong, and you're just calling it normal?" I tried to explain what my doctor had told me, but David had already walked away, muttering something about how pregnancy was more intense than he'd signed up for. The comments became a daily occurrence. When I mentioned that my back was aching, David would roll his eyes and say, "Here we go again with the pregnancy complaints." When I had to get up 3 times during a movie to pee, he paused it with an exaggerated sigh and said, "This is why I don't like going to theaters with you anymore." But the absolute worst incident happened during week 24, at his coworker's birthday party. I was wearing a maternity dress that I thought made me look cute and pregnant, not just fat. I was finally feeling confident about my changing body and excited to show off my bump to people who hadn't seen me in a while. David's coworker Marcus came up to us with a huge smile. "Emma, look at you. You're glowing. How are you feeling?" I started to answer honestly, mentioning that I was feeling pretty good overall, but dealing with some new symptoms like heartburn and round ligament pain. Before I could finish, David cut me off. "She's fine," he said curtly. "Everything's normal." Marcus looked confused by David's abrupt response, but tried to keep the conversation going. "That's great. Are you guys excited? Have you picked out names yet?" I opened my mouth to share some of the names we'd been discussing, but David spoke first again. "We're still figuring that out. Hey Marcus, did you catch the game last night?" I stood there, stunned, as David completely changed the subject and effectively ended any conversation about our pregnancy. Marcus looked between us awkwardly, before eventually drifting away to talk to other people. "Why did you do that?" I asked David when we were alone. "Do what?" "Cut me off when I was talking about the pregnancy." Marcus was just being nice and asking normal questions. David shrugged. "Nobody wants to hear about your heartburn, Em. It's not exactly party conversation." But he asked how I was feeling. What was I supposed to say? Just say you're fine and leave it at that. People are just being polite when they ask. They don't actually want the gory details. I felt humiliated and confused. Were my pregnancy experiences really that inappropriate to share? Was I oversharing without realizing it? The situation reached a breaking point 2 weeks later during a dinner with David's parents. His mom, Carol, had made my favorite lasagna and was being incredibly sweet, asking about the baby and how I was feeling. I was in the middle of telling her about feeling the baby's movements getting stronger when David suddenly slammed his fork down. "Mom, can we please talk about literally anything else? Emma's been going on about pregnancy stuff for 20 minutes straight." The table went silent. Carol looked shocked, and David's dad, Mike, raised his eyebrows. I felt my face burn with embarrassment. "David," Carol said carefully, "Emma is carrying your child. Of course we want to hear about how she's doing. I get that. But does every conversation have to revolve around her symptoms and what the baby did today? It's like she doesn't have a personality anymore beyond being pregnant." I felt like I'd been slapped. "That's not fair, David. Your mom asked me direct questions and I was answering them. You always answer them with way too much detail. Nobody needs to know about your weird pains or how often you're peeing or what your doctor said about your cervix. It's gross, and it makes people uncomfortable." Carol gasped. "David, Michael, that is enough. Emma is family, and she's going through something beautiful and challenging. You should be supporting her, not making her feel ashamed." But David wasn't done. "I'm just saying pregnancy doesn't have to be everyone else's problem. Other women manage to be pregnant without making it their entire identity and grossing everyone out with constant updates." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I felt tears starting to form, but I was too shocked to cry. This was the man I was supposed to marry, the father of my child, and he was calling my pregnancy experiences gross in front of his own parents. Mike cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Son, I think you need to apologize to Emma." "For what? For being honest?" "I'm sorry if the truth hurts, but someone needed to say it." I stood up from the table, my hands shaking. "You know what, David? You're absolutely right. I'm sorry for making my pregnancy everyone else's problem. I won't bother you with any more gross updates." Carol reached for my hand. "Emma, honey, you don't need to." "No, it's fine," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "David has made his feelings very clear. I'll keep my disgusting pregnancy experiences to myself from now on." David looked satisfied, like he'd finally gotten through to me. "Thank you. That's all I was asking for." But as I walked to the bathroom to compose myself, I wasn't planning to just tone down my sharing. I was planning to cut him out of my pregnancy experience entirely. If he found it so revolting, then he didn't deserve to be part of it at all. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. David wanted silence about my pregnancy. He was about to get exactly what he asked for. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. David was already in the shower, getting ready for work like nothing had happened the night before. As I lay there listening to the water running, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of our entire relationship. If David found my pregnancy so disgusting and inappropriate to discuss, then he simply wouldn't be included in it anymore. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, he actually seemed to be in a good mood. "Hey babe, thanks for last night. I know it was hard to hear, but I think we're going to be much better now that we're on the same page." I looked at him with fresh eyes. This man who thought he'd successfully trained me to shut up about carrying his child. "You're absolutely right, David. We are definitely on the same page now." He smiled, completely missing the ice in my voice, and kissed my forehead before getting dressed. "I'll see you tonight. Maybe we can actually have a normal conversation for once." The moment he left for work, I started making calls. First, I called my doctor's office and removed David from my emergency contact list, replacing him with my best friend Sarah. Then I called my mom. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you were pregnant with me, did Dad ever tell you that your pregnancy symptoms were gross or inappropriate to share?" There was a long pause. "Emma, honey, what's going on? Did David say something?" I told her everything. The dinner at his parents', the months of comments, the way he'd been making me feel ashamed of my own pregnancy. By the end, my mom was furious. "Emma, that is not normal behavior from a partner. When I was pregnant, your father rubbed my feet every night, held my hair when I was sick, and bragged to anyone who would listen about how amazing I was for growing his baby. What David is doing, that's emotional abuse, sweetheart." Hearing my mom say those words, emotional abuse, hit me like a lightning bolt. I'd been so focused on trying to be understanding and accommodating that I hadn't recognized what was actually happening to me. My 26-week appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. For the first time in months, I was actually looking forward to it because I knew David wouldn't be there to make me feel ashamed or rush me through my questions. When Dr. Martinez asked where David was, I simply said he couldn't make it. "How are you feeling emotionally, Emma?" Dr. Martinez asked, studying my chart. "Your blood pressure is a little elevated today." For the first time in months, I was honest with a medical professional about what was happening at home. Dr. Martinez listened with growing concern as I described David's behavior and how isolated I'd been feeling. "Emma, stress during pregnancy can have serious effects on both you and the baby. Do you feel safe at home?" The question caught me off guard. Safe? David had never hurt me physically, but as I thought about it, I realized I'd been walking on eggshells for months, constantly monitoring what I said and how I acted to avoid his disgust and criticism. I don't know," I admitted. Dr. Martinez gave me a referral for a counselor who specialized in pregnancy and relationship issues, along with some resources about emotional abuse during pregnancy. She also scheduled me for more frequent appointments to monitor my blood pressure. That evening, David came home in a great mood, chattering about his day and asking what I wanted for dinner. The normalcy felt surreal after the day I'd had. "How was your day?" he asked, opening a beer. "Fine," I said simply. He waited for more details, but when none came, he shrugged and started talking about his coworker's new project. For the first time in months, we had dinner without any mention of pregnancy, baby preparations, or how I was feeling. David seemed delighted by this development. Over the next few weeks, I became a master of selective information sharing. When David asked how my doctor's appointment went, I'd say fine and change the subject. When he occasionally asked about the baby, I'd give one-word answers. When his mom called to check on me, I'd have long, detailed conversations about everything, but only when David wasn't around. The first real test came at week 28, when I started experiencing Braxton Hicks contractions. The first one hit while David and I were watching TV, and I couldn't help but gasp and put my hand on my belly as my entire abdomen tightened. "What's wrong?" David asked, looking alarmed. "Nothing," I said, breathing through the contraction. "Just a cramp." "Are you sure? That looked pretty intense." I remembered his words from dinner at his parents' house. "Nobody needs to know about your weird pains." So I smiled and said, "I'm fine. It's nothing to worry about." David looked relieved and turned back to the TV. He had no idea he'd just missed learning about an important development in his daughter's gestation. The Braxton Hicks contractions continued over the next few weeks, sometimes strong enough to take my breath away. I discussed them with Dr. Martinez, my mom, and Sarah, but David remained completely oblivious. When he occasionally noticed me pausing or breathing deeply, I'd just say I was tired or needed to stretch. At week 30, during a routine appointment, Dr. Martinez found that my blood pressure was still elevated and there were traces of protein in my urine, early signs of preeclampsia. She wanted to see me twice a week and ordered additional monitoring. "Emma, this is serious," she said. "Preeclampsia can develop quickly and become dangerous for both you and the baby. You need to watch for symptoms like severe headaches, vision changes, or upper abdominal pain. If you experience any of these, you need to come in immediately or go to the hospital." I nodded, taking notes and asking questions. When I got home, David asked his usual, "How did it go?" "Fine," I replied. "Everything's normal." He smiled and went back to his laptop. He had no idea that his daughter and I were potentially developing a life-threatening condition. The irony wasn't lost on me. David had complained that I shared too much information about my pregnancy, so now he was getting no information at all, and the less he knew, the more obvious it became how little he actually cared about what I was going through. Week 32 brought the conversation I'd been dreading. David's friend Jake was getting married in Vegas, and the bachelor party was planned for the weekend I'd be 34 weeks pregnant. "I know the timing isn't ideal," David said, "but I'm Jake's best man. I have to be there." "Of course," I said. "You should go." David looked surprised by my easy agreement. "Really? You're not going to guilt-trip me about leaving you when you're so pregnant?" "Why would I? You've made it clear that my pregnancy isn't really your concern." "That's not... of course it's my concern. I just meant you're not going to give me a hard time about having fun with the guys." "Have fun, David. I'll be fine." What David didn't know was that Dr. Martinez had been increasingly concerned about my blood pressure readings. At my appointment that week, she'd warned me that if my condition worsened, we might need to consider early delivery. "Emma, I want you to be extra vigilant this weekend," she'd said. "Any concerning symptoms, and I want you to go straight to the hospital. Don't wait." So while David was planning his Vegas weekend, I was mentally preparing for the possibility that our daughter might decide to arrive early. The difference was, only one of us knew what was actually happening. Friday morning, David left for the airport with his overnight bag, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to take it easy while he was gone. He was so excited about his weekend of freedom that he didn't notice the hospital bag I'd packed and hidden in our bedroom closet, or the list of emergency contacts I'd updated on my phone. "I'll call you tonight," he said, already mentally checked out. "Sure," I replied. "Have a good time." As I watched him drive away, I realized that this might be the weekend everything changed. And if it was, David would miss it entirely. Not because of an emergency or unforeseen circumstances, but because he'd systematically removed himself from my pregnancy experience. Saturday morning, I woke up with the worst headache of my life and spots dancing in my vision. My hands and feet were so swollen I couldn't get my rings off. As I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to decide if this was serious enough to call the doctor, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Vegas is amazing! Won $200 at blackjack last night. Hope you're having a relaxing weekend." I stared at the text, then at my swollen hands, then back at the text. My husband-to-be was celebrating winning $200 while I was potentially facing a medical emergency with our child. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that I was completely on my own. And that's when the real contractions started. The contractions started as a dull ache in my lower back while I was sitting on the bathroom floor, trying to decide whether my symptoms were serious enough to call Dr. Martinez. Within 20 minutes, they'd intensified into unmistakable labor pains that took my breath away. I called the hospital first, describing my symptoms to the triage nurse. Severe headache, vision changes, swelling, and contractions every 5 minutes at 34 weeks, I told her, my voice shaking. "You need to come in immediately," she said. "Do you have someone who can drive you?" I looked at my phone, David's cheerful Vegas text still glowing on the screen. "I'll figure it out." I called Sarah, but it went straight to voicemail. She was at her sister's wedding 3 hours away. My mom lived across the country. David's parents were at their lake house for the weekend. As another contraction hit, I realized I was going to have to drive myself to the hospital. The 10-minute drive felt like an eternity. I had to pull over twice when contractions made it impossible to focus on the road. When I finally made it to the hospital parking lot, I sat in my car for a moment, looking at David's contact on my phone. This was it. the moment where a normal partner would drop everything and rush to be by my side. Instead, I turned off my phone and walked into the hospital alone. The next few hours were a blur of medical activity. My blood pressure was dangerously high, the protein in my urine had increased dramatically, and I was in active preterm labor. Dr. Martinez arrived within an hour, taking one look at my test results and ordering immediate interventions. "Emma, we need to deliver this baby today," she said gently. "Your preeclampsia is severe, and waiting any longer could be dangerous for both of you." "Is she going to be okay?" I asked, my hand on my belly as another contraction peaked. "Babies born at 34 weeks do very well with proper care. The NICU team is already preparing for her arrival." As they prepped me for an emergency C-section, a nurse asked about my emergency contacts. "Is there anyone you'd like us to call?" I thought about David, probably drunk by a pool in Vegas, completely oblivious to the fact that his daughter was about to be born 6 weeks early due to a condition he knew nothing about. "My mom," I said finally, giving them her number, "and my friend Sarah." They wheeled me into the operating room at 11:47 p.m. on Saturday night. At 12:23 a.m. Sunday morning, Lily Grace was born, weighing 4 pounds 12 ounces, screaming her tiny lungs out to announce her early arrival to the world. The moment they placed her on my chest, even for just those few seconds before taking her to the NICU, I felt a love so fierce and protective that it changed me at a cellular level. David's daughter had arrived, and he had no idea. I spent Sunday recovering from surgery and making trips to the NICU to see Lily. She was so small, hooked up to monitors and breathing assistance, but she was perfect. The nurses were incredible, teaching me how to do skin-to-skin contact and helping me start pumping breast milk for her. My mom had booked the first flight she could find and arrived Sunday evening, crying the moment she saw me. "Oh, sweetheart, you went through all of this alone?" "I wasn't alone," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. "I had the best medical team, and now I have Lily." "Where is David?" she asked, looking around the room like he might be hiding somewhere. "Vegas. Bachelor party." My mom's face went through several emotions before settling on barely contained rage. "He doesn't know?" He made it very clear that my pregnancy was disgusting and inappropriate to discuss. I was just respecting his wishes. Sunday night, my phone started buzzing with calls from David. I let them all go to voicemail. When I finally listened to the messages Monday morning, his tone progressed from cheerful and drunk to confused to increasingly frantic. Message 1, Sunday 10 p.m. "Hey babe, just wanted to check in. Having an amazing time. Call me back." Message 2, Sunday 11:30 p.m. I tried calling but it went straight to voicemail. "Everything okay?" Message 3, Monday 6 a.m. "Emma, I'm getting worried. You're not answering your phone. Please call me back." Message 4, Monday 8 a.m. "What the fuck, Emma? I've called you 10 times. Are you ignoring me? This isn't funny." Message 5, Monday 10 a.m. "I'm calling your mom if you don't answer your phone in the next hour." I was in the NICU, holding Lily during her feeding time, when my phone rang with David's contact. I answered on the 4th ring. "Jesus Christ, Emma. Where have you been? I've been calling you for hours." "I've been busy," I said calmly, watching Lily's tiny fingers wrap around mine. "Busy with what?" "You're supposed to be resting this weekend. I was worried something happened." "Something did happen, David." There was a pause. "What do you mean? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Lily is doing well too, considering she was born 6 weeks early." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally, David's voice came through, barely a whisper. "What did you just say?" "I said Lily is doing well. Your daughter was born yesterday at 12:23 a.m. She's 4 pounds 12 ounces and she's beautiful." That's not possible. You're not due until October. It's only August. Preeclampsia doesn't follow due dates, David. But don't worry. I handled it quietly, just like you wanted. No gross pregnancy updates to ruin your weekend." I could hear him breathing heavily. "Emma, this isn't... You can't be serious. You had the baby yesterday, and you didn't call me? You were very clear that pregnancy details make you uncomfortable. I was protecting you from having to deal with disgusting medical information. This is different. This is the birth of my child." "No, David. This is exactly what you said you didn't want to hear about. Blood, medical procedures, emergency situations, all the gross stuff you've been complaining about for months. Where are you? What hospital? I'm coming home right now." I looked down at Lily, so small and perfect in my arms, and felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Don't rush back on our account. We're doing just fine without you." The line went quiet, except for what sounded like David crying. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken. "Emma, please. I know I messed up, but this is my daughter. I need to be there. You made your choice, David. Every single day for months, you chose to make me feel ashamed and disgusting for carrying your child. You chose to miss appointments, avoid conversations, and treat my pregnancy like it was some inconvenience you had to tolerate. You chose Vegas over being here when your daughter needed you most." "I didn't know she was coming early. You should have told me. I should have told you about a lot of things, but you made it very clear you didn't want to hear them." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. For the first time since this pregnancy began, I wasn't walking on eggshells or monitoring my words or feeling ashamed of my body's needs. I was exactly where I needed to be, with exactly who mattered most. And David was exactly where he'd chosen to be, sitting in that NICU chair at 2 a.m., watching my tiny daughter breathe with the help of machines. I had a lot of time to think about how I'd gotten to this point. The quiet hum of monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses created a strange kind of peace that I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since my pregnancy began, I wasn't anxious about saying the wrong thing or sharing too much information. I was just a mother, focused entirely on her child. The hardest lesson I learned was recognizing that I had been in an emotionally abusive relationship without even realizing it. When someone systematically makes you feel ashamed of normal bodily functions and life experiences, that's not just being squeamish or uncomfortable, that's control. David had trained me to monitor every word I said, to second-guess my own experiences, and to prioritize his comfort over my basic need for support during one of the most vulnerable times in my life. I thought about all the moments I'd excused his behavior. He's just not good with medical stuff. He's nervous about becoming a dad. He doesn't mean to hurt my feelings. I'd spent so much energy making excuses for him that I'd stopped advocating for myself entirely. Looking back, I could see the pattern clearly. Every time I tried to share something important about my pregnancy, David found a way to make it about his discomfort instead of my experience. The isolation had been gradual but devastating. I'd gone from being excited to share every milestone with my partner to feeling like I couldn't mention basic pregnancy symptoms without being made to feel gross or inappropriate. I'd started censoring myself in conversations with friends and family because David's voice was always in my head, telling me I was oversharing or being dramatic. But here's what I realized sitting in that hospital room. Pregnancy isn't something that happens to you in isolation. It's a family experience that requires support, understanding, and partnership. When David chose to opt out of that experience because it made him uncomfortable, he wasn't just being a bad partner. He was abandoning his responsibilities as a father before our daughter was even born. The most profound realization was understanding the difference between being alone and being lonely. I'd felt desperately lonely for months while living with David, constantly craving the emotional support and partnership I thought I deserved. But sitting alone in that NICU, I felt more supported and empowered than I had in my entire pregnancy. The nurses treated my experiences as normal and important. My mom flew across the country without hesitation. My friend Sarah was already planning to take time off work to help me when I got home. I had a support system. David just wasn't part of it. I learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel or manipulative, even when the other person doesn't like the consequences. When I stopped sharing pregnancy information with David, I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting myself from further emotional harm. He'd made it clear that my experiences disgusted him, so I removed myself from that dynamic. The fact that this meant he missed important milestones and medical information was a natural consequence of his own choices, not my vindictiveness. The experience taught me to trust my instincts about people's true character. David had shown me exactly who he was when I needed him most, and I'd spent months trying to rationalize and excuse that behavior instead of accepting it. When someone tells you through their actions that they find your struggles disgusting, believe them. When someone consistently prioritizes their comfort over your basic needs, that's information about their values and priorities. I also learned that love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect, support, and basic human decency. I'd loved David deeply, and I believe he loved me too in his own way. But love without respect is just emotional attachment, and attachment without support is just dependency. Real love shows up when things get difficult, uncomfortable, and messy. Real love doesn't make you feel ashamed of your body or your experiences. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. I'd navigated a high-risk pregnancy, made medical decisions, handled an emergency delivery, and advocated for my daughter's care, all while dealing with the emotional trauma of an unsupportive partner. I'd done things I never thought I could do, and I'd done them well. The woman who'd been so desperate for David's approval and support a few months earlier had evolved into someone who could handle whatever came next. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, advocate for my needs, and prioritize my daughter's well-being above everything else. As I watched Lily sleep in her isolette, I realized that David's rejection of our pregnancy experience had actually been a gift. It forced me to develop the independence and strength I'd need as a mother. It showed me who my real support system was, and it gave me the clarity to see that I deserved better than someone who found the miracle of creating life disgusting. The most important lesson of all was this: you can't force someone to be the partner you need them to be, but you can choose to stop accepting less than you deserve. David's flight landed Monday afternoon, and he went straight from the airport to the hospital. I was in the NICU when the nurse told me there was someone asking to see me at the front desk. I knew it was him before she even said his name. When I walked out to meet him, David looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. His eyes were red and swollen, his clothes wrinkled from traveling, and his hands were shaking as he held a bouquet of flowers that looked like he'd grabbed them from the hospital gift shop. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry." I stood there looking at this man I'd planned to marry, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no relief that he was finally there. Just emptiness. "She's beautiful," I said simply. 4 pounds, 12 ounces. "The doctors say she's doing really well for 34 weeks. Can I see her, please?" I led him back to the NICU, where we had to scrub in and put on gowns. David's hands were shaking so badly he could barely get the soap to dispense. When we got to Lily's isolette, he just stared at her for the longest time, tears streaming down his face. "She's so small," he whispered. "Premature babies usually are. Emma, I know I fucked up. I know I said terrible things, and I wasn't there when you needed me. But please, we can fix this. I can change. I want to be a good father." I watched him looking at our daughter through the plastic walls of her isolette, and I felt sad for both of them. Sad that he'd missed her first day of life. Sad that she'd have to grow up knowing her father chose a bachelor party over being there when she was born. Sad that it had taken this crisis for him to realize what he'd lost. "You can be a good father, David, but you can't be my partner anymore." He turned to look at me, panic in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. You've shown me who you are when things get difficult, and I can't unknow that. I can't trust you to support me through hard times, because you've already proven you won't. But I love you. I love both of you. I know you do. But love isn't enough when it's not backed up by respect and support. You made me feel ashamed of carrying your child, David. You made me feel like my pregnancy was an inconvenience you had to tolerate, rather than a miracle we were experiencing together." Over the next week, while Lily grew stronger in the NICU, David and I worked out the practical details of our new reality. He moved out of our apartment and into his parents' house. We established a custody arrangement that would start once Lily was healthy enough to leave the hospital. We canceled our October wedding and began the process of untangling our shared life. The hardest part wasn't the logistics. It was watching David finally become the involved, caring partner I'd needed him to be all along, but only after it was too late. He read every parenting book he could find. He took classes on premature infant care. He spent hours in the NICU just talking to Lily and learning her routines. "I get it now," he told me one day as we sat on opposite sides of her isolette. "I understand what I put you through, and I hate myself for it. I don't need you to hate yourself, David. I just need you to be a good father to her." Lily came home after 3 weeks in the NICU, weighing a healthy 6 pounds and passing all her tests with flying colors. David had transformed the nursery in his new apartment, complete with all the specialized equipment for a former preemie. He was nervous but capable during his first overnight visit, texting me updates and photos throughout the night. 6 months later, as I write this, we've settled into a co-parenting routine that actually works. David sees Lily 3 times a week and every other weekend. He's in therapy, working on understanding how his behavior during my pregnancy was emotionally abusive. He's become the father I always hoped he'd be. just not the partner I needed him to be. I'm not angry anymore. I'm actually grateful that everything happened the way it did, because it forced me to discover my own strength and showed me what I'm truly capable of handling on my own. Lily and I have a beautiful life filled with people who showed up when we needed them most. To anyone listening who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts about how you deserve to be treated. Pregnancy and parenthood reveal people's true character in ways that nothing else can. Pay attention to who shows up for you during your most vulnerable moments, because that's who will be there for the long haul. And remember, you're stronger than you think you are, even when you feel completely alone. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone during a vulnerable time in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.